We're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. That's the signpost ahead. Next stop, America, 2021. Nothing is real. Facts give way to feelings, but only certain feelings, only approved feelings. Whatever you do, don't let them see the questions in your mind. We're distorting basic facts about the world. If the woke have their way, we won't even be able to appeal to birth and death certificates for accuracy and truth. Let's talk about where we're going and what we stand to lose this week on Disaffected.
Nuts! I can't even play my own record. I can't even play Perry Como. Don't play that, Pat. That's not what I want you to play. Play this. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday,
Please
dear
stop.
Danny.
Please
Happy
stop.
birthday to me. Play it, Pat. Play it so I can sing right. You know I can't carry a tune unless somebody plays it. You and her, you had him. You had to go have him. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when I am blue. You monster, you. You dirty little monster. You murderer. You think about me. Go ahead, Anthony. You think bad thoughts about me. And maybe some man in this room, some man with guts, somebody who's so sick to death of living in this kind of place and willing to take a chance, will sneak up behind you and lay something heavy across your skull and end this once and for all.
You're a bad man. You're a very bad man.
You think that? Go ahead, Anthony. I'm a very bad man. Keep thinking that. Somebody sneak up behind him. Somebody end this now while he's thinking about me. Won't somebody take a lamp or a bottle or something and end this?
You're a bad man. You're a very bad man. And you keep thinking bad thoughts about me.
Wish it into the cornfield. Please, son, wish it into the cornfield, please.
He was a bad man, so I turned him into a jack-in-the-box. A jack-in-the-box that still had his bad face. And you mustn't think bad thoughts about me either, or I'll do the same thing to you. Play some more music.
It's good what you've done to Dad. It's real good.
It was swell. It was just swell. It was really good.
I kind of liked it a little bit better when we had cities outside and we could get real television. Things like that.
Amy, it's real good for you to say such a thing. It's real good. But how can you mean it? Why, Anthony's television is much better than anything we ever used to get.
Oh, yes, it's fine. Why, Anthony's television is the best television we've ever seen.
Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum. I don't think there's anything more appropriate for the time we're living in than the original Twilight Zone. For those of you who are listening and can't see that, that was a clip from the episode, I believe it was from the first season, called It's a Real Good Thing. And the story is a child with mental powers. A tyrant of a child, a narcissistic psychopath who corrals the adults around him and remakes the world with his mind, and anyone he doesn't like, anything he doesn't want to happen, he wishes into the cornfield, or he wishes a person into a jack-in-the-box, or he creates a three-headed monster in his mind. The entire world revolves around this child. All the adults have to tell him what a real good thing it was that you did that. Because if they're insufficiently enthusiastic, that means they're thinking bad thoughts. And you know what happens to you when you think bad thoughts? You go to the cornfield. In earlier episodes of this show, I drew on science fiction movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Stepford Wives, to talk about the feeling of walking around in our society today, knowing that people that you know, people that you don't know, people that you run into at the bank, you feel watched. You feel like you are incognito, and you don't want them to know that you're not one of them. Because if they know, then you're in the cornfield. And I want to tell you about something that happened to me at work this week. It's not the first time that something like this has happened. It's getting more frequent. I don't bring up the topics that I talk about on this show at work. This is my free time. These are my political views, my personal views. They're not appropriate in the office. So just out of sheer professionalism, what I do here has nothing to do with my day job. But I especially don't bring these things up because I work in a nonprofit, and the nonprofit human services world is filled with a lot of very good people, but they're almost entirely liberal leftists. And I have gone from being a liberal leftist and a progressive Democrat myself to somebody who doesn't fit into a party label. I guess the closest thing I could say is maybe I'm a centrist, I'm an independent. I don't need to be a thing, but people are always asking. And I know that people around me in the world that I work in, they're sniffing me out. They're trying to detect whether I am insufficiently enthusiastic. So this week, I got an email from a longtime colleague, somebody I've known for 18 years, been an important person in the field that I work in, somebody I've relied on for advice, somebody I've worked with on projects, somebody whose house I have been to when I'm traveling in the area of the country where they live. And it was an image of an obituary. And the message from my colleague and friend said, make sure you read the obituary all the way to the end. I won't read you the entire obituary, but I will read you the end. This obituary was from July of last year. Gentleman died, 80 years old. Okay, keep that in mind. This gentleman was 80 years old, and he died of COVID. Let me read you the last part of his obituary after we go past the usual biographical stuff. Family members believe David's death was needless. They blame his death and the deaths of all the other innocent people on Trump, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and all the other politicians who did not take this pandemic seriously and were more concerned with their popularity and votes than lives. Also to blame are the many ignorant, self-centered, and selfish people who refuse to follow the advice of medical professionals, believing their right not to wear a mask was more important than killing innocent people. A statement issued by the family declared that Dave did everything that he was supposed to do, but you did not. Shame on all of you, and may karma find you all. That's horrifying. It's horrifying. I don't care that this family is in grief. This isn't just grief that you're seeing and hearing here. This is paranoia and narcissism and a little bit of sadism. It's one thing to have these feelings. It's entirely another to put them in a newspaper obituary. So I got this email and thought to myself, what's being communicated to me? What is my friend expecting me to communicate in response? It was what you suspect. No, my friend was not sharing this to express how distasteful it was, but to indicate approval. I won't do it. I wrote back very tersely, didn't swear, didn't lose my temper, but I was curt. And I said, I find this self-righteous, nasty, and appalling. And it is this kind of behavior that has been normalized on the left, which has driven me away from the political and social circles that I used to belong to. And I pressed send. And a few minutes later, another email popped up. And my colleague said, I think he was wondering if I was thinking bad thoughts. I think he was surprised that I didn't say it was a real good thing, a real fine thing, that they put that obituary in there. Real fine. And he said, so does this mean that you don't believe that you should have to wear a mask or comply with vaccine mandates from the government or keep appropriate physical distance? Are you now, or have you ever been? And I said, I am not willing to have this conversation because I'm not willing to take any of the abuse that I have seen dished out to anyone who disagrees with somebody on these political and medical issues right now. And I've experienced enough of it personally. I'm sorry, I'm not having this conversation. So, of course, my colleague and friend knows that I don't think this is a real good thing, a real fine thing. This isn't normal. It's so difficult to figure out how to talk about this because I'm seeing sides of people that I didn't know existed. And I don't know what it means. I don't know. I think for many of them, maybe even most of them, they're caught up. They're bewitched. They're enchanted, right? They may come out of this at some point and say, my God, I went really far, didn't I? But the fact that people that I respect, people who've done good work in the world, a lot of good work on behalf of people in really tight situations, poor people, immigrants, people who don't speak English and are trying to get around in this country. These are good people. They're not acting like good people. They're scaring me. And one thing that I suspect this is going on for a lot of you who are listening. I think it's going on for a lot of Americans. I don't see a lot of discussion about it. It's not something that gets itself a column in Slate or in the New York Times. Every other personal problem, as long as it coincides with what the left's obsessions are, every personal problem in all of its ugly detail gets covered in the media, but things like this don't. How many relationships, how many friendships are quietly dying right now because we are afraid of our friends? We are afraid to find out things about them that we don't want to know. We are afraid of how they will react to us if we disagree. Before I started recording this show today, I met up with a group of friends, some of whom are very close friends, and they are good people, but they're completely captured. I spent 2 hours fake smiling and keeping my counsel. Yeah, I know. I'm a loudmouth. That's why I have a talk show. I said very little because I can't say anything. These are people who believe that what happened on January 6th in the Capitol was an insurrection. This is the word they used. They believe that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is killing thousands of people. It does not matter what I say. I've tried. Doesn't matter if I say it gently. Doesn't matter if I modulate my voice in a calm way the way I'm speaking to you right now. It doesn't make any difference. 2 spoonfuls of sugar will not make this medicine go down. The reaction for the disagreement verges on hysteria. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And so friends drift away. Relationships founder. One day, for some of us, with some of our friends, there just won't be another phone call. It's one of the saddest things about this past year and a half. And I know it's happening for a lot of people. Let's turn to something a little bigger. We are losing the idea of truth and objective reality at a societal level. It's not just trans, right? It's not just people pretending that there's no difference between men and women, pretending that biological sex isn't real. That's part of it. It's a big part of it. But it's going deeper. We are questioning and destabilizing the very idea that there is something called the truth or objective reality, and that all humans have access to it if we use the right process to find it. We don't believe in it anymore. Some people, the people who are really interested in destabilizing truth, they believe in it. They claim that they don't, but they do. They don't like it. And they know that they can't come right out and say to your face, I know this is reality, but reality doesn't service me the way I want to be serviced, so fuck reality. They can't quite get away with that. So they pretend that it isn't real. There's an article on the webpage WebMD about the American Medical Association, the largest trade association for doctors in the United States. Headline: Medical Association wants sex removed from public parts of birth certificates. I'll read you a little bit to set it up. Sex should be removed as a legal designation on the public part of birth certificates, the American Medical Association said Monday. Requiring it can lead to discrimination and unnecessary burden on individuals whose current gender identity does not align with their designation at birth, namely when they register for school or sports, adopt, get married, or request personal records. A person's sex designation at birth would still be submitted to the U.S. Standard Certificate of Live Birth for medical, public health, and statistical use only, report authors note. And we have a quote from one of the members here who says, assigning sex using binary variables in the public portion of the birth certificate fails to recognize the medical spectrum of gender identity and can be used to discriminate. Let's look at a couple of these nonsense lies that they're trying to smuggle through. You are not designated a sex at birth. You are not assigned a sex at birth. Your sex is observed. It's not something a doctor makes up. It's not something they give you. It's not an assignment. It's an observation of reality. Does the baby have a penis or a vulva? It's very simple. So simple, even a medical doctor ought to be able to see it. And there is no medical spectrum of gender identity. Gender identity is a psychological phantom. It's not real. Yes, it is. I have a gender identity. My gender identity is female. No. You don't have a gender identity. You have a fantasy and likely a personality disorder. There's nothing medical about gender identity. Why are we talking about gender identity? I thought we were talking about sex on birth certificates. Sex and gender aren't the same thing. Isn't that what they're telling us? Right? So if they're not the same thing, why are you mixing one for the other? Why do you think, audience? The disaffected. Why do you think they're doing it? Because they know. These are people who know that there is something called the truth, and they fucking hate the truth. So they're pretending they don't understand. Another quote from another member of the AMA. We unfortunately still live in a world where it is unsafe in many cases for one's gender to vary from the sex assigned at birth. Unsafe. Unsafe. I don't feel safe. If you can't see me, I'm hugging myself and rocking because I don't feel safe. Bullshit. This is grown-ups saying this stuff too. I expect this from stroppy teenagers. But these are grown-ups, medical doctors. It's unsafe for your gender identity to vary from your sex assigned at birth, which wasn't assigned, it was observed. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's unsafe to say what I'm saying right now into this microphone, into this camera. These are the kinds of things that are unsafe. This is the kind of talk that is probably going to cost me my job and my employability in a huge swath of the nonprofit and human services world. No one is going to hire me. And this is happening to people all over the place. Teachers, nurses, librarians, business people. That's what's unsafe. This stuff is celebrated. Anybody who claims to have a gender identity or an oppression is elevated on to the cover of magazines, the front pages of newspapers, all over social media. The world could not be safer for the malingerers, fakers, narcissists, and borderlines. The world is completely safe for them. It's been remade for them. One more quote. These people love to hear themselves talk. Bollocks. Talk utter bollocks. Not having this data on the widely used form will reduce unnecessary reliance on sex as a stand-in for gender and would serve as an equalizer since policies differ by state. Sex is a stand-in for gender. The birth certificate is not a gender identity validation document. It is a statistical document that describes the physical reality and observable, objective identity of the person there. A stand-in for gender? This has never been about gender. This is a reversal. They are reversing the truth. And they're saying it with such confidence, and they're saying it in the cadence and the vocabulary of the professional, so that you won't feel like you are important enough to challenge them. That's why they're doing it. Oh, okay, I know I said one more, but I have one more. We as physicians, oh, did I mix this up? No, actually, here's where I have to give WebMD credit. That's why I pulled this one, because there was one person talking sense in this whole article. We as physicians need to report things accurately. All through medical school, residency, and specialty training, we were supposed to delegate all of the physical findings of the patient we're taking care of. I think when the child is born, they do have physical characteristics, either male or female, and I think that probably should be on the public record. That's just my personal opinion. Notice how he had to say, that's just my personal opinion, and I think. He's defending himself. I understand why he's doing it. He shouldn't have to, though. That tells you the pressure. And then, of course, the article ends by using the other 100% effective guilt card, which is, well, race used to be on the public part of death certificates too, but it's not because racism, so you wouldn't want to challenge us on this, would you? You're not a racist, are you? You agree that gender identity and discrimination based on gender identity is just as deep a moral sin as racism, don't you? Yeah, I do. I promise. It's a real good thing that you're doing this with death certificates. Real good thing. There's more after the break. Come back. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. So, we just got something that came across the electronic transom today. Kevin, can we put up on the screen our little copyright dispute? So, what we've got here on the screen is a copyright claim against our episode last week. If you recall, we used a short clip, I think it was about 22 seconds, of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being interviewed. I'm sorry, I don't remember the journalist's name. And it was a clip where she was talking about the fact that she, during the protest, riot, break-in, trespass, whatever happened at the Capitol on January 6th, that she said she wasn't just afraid that she was going to be murdered, she was afraid that she was going to be raped. And we commented on that. We commented on how these claims are, they're just, the media loves them, right? Well, CNN, Turner Broadcasting, launched a copyright claim against us for using this. And of course, we asserted that this falls squarely within the doctrine of fair use, which allows pieces from other people to be used for commentary. But I have to ask. No. Well, do I have to ask? Or am I going to be disingenuous with you and give people the benefit of the doubt when you know that I don't actually believe they deserve the benefit of the doubt? I strongly suspect that CNN would not have lodged this complaint if we were saying the right things. I suspect that if we had played this very short clip and praised Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or perhaps congratulated the journalist on camera for her hard-hitting work, that there wouldn't be any copyright claim. But there's a copyright claim because we've been thinking bad thoughts. I'm a bad man, a very bad man. We'll see where it goes. So, we are going to stay on the topic of birth certificates. And again, I'll probably say this many, many times on many, many episodes. Because sex, alleged gender identity, and all issues trans are probably the most Simon Pure distillation of the nonsense world that we're living in, the inverted values, the cluster B values, the narcissistic, pathological lying that we all have to deal with every day and pretend it's something that it's not. It expresses itself most fully here. So last year in the UK, a trans man, that is a woman, the person I'm about to speak about is a woman who is deluded and believes that she is a man and has gone all the way through, I believe, surgical transition, hormone therapy. Listen to me, even I fall for it. It isn't therapy, it's poison. Freddie McConnell, Guardian journalist, I believe. Freddie is. The Guardian. Freddie McConnell wanted to make a name for Freddie McConnell's self by being the first trans man to get a birth certificate changed for her child to reflect her not as the mother, but as the father. Yes. Isn't that lovely? Very first thing you do after you have a child is start shrieking about the fact that the child that you pushed out of your vaginal birth canal is listed on a birth certificate and you were listed as the mother, as you are, and then go make media hay with it. Have a thought for this child. Look at this child's mother. Maybe he or she will be talking to me in 20 years. So, last fall, Freddie went all the way through a case that got all the way up to the UK's Supreme Court, and Freddie lost, thankfully. Let me give you a few quotes here from Freddie McConnell on this terrible civil rights issue. The law around birth registration doesn't treat LGBT people equally on any level, he said. There needs to be a series of cases to address this or a change in the law. I feel I am too deep into this to stop now. I am going to keep fighting, and I ask anyone who can contribute to this to reach out. Too deep into this to stop now. Yep, that's the sunk cost fallacy right there. Well, I've spent so much money anyway. I've spent so much political capital that it'll all be wasted if I don't keep going on this bullshit road. And of course, they turned to Stonewall, the charity that up until about 2015 used to represent gay rights in the UK, campaigned for the legalization of same-sex marriage. But once that was won, they got a case of, I believe it's what the author Douglas Murray says is St. George and retirement syndrome after he'd slain all the dragons, he had to create new dragons to slay. So Stonewall latched on to trans as the civil rights issue of our era. And in so doing, have neglected gays, lesbians, and bisexuals, have actually campaigned and put out propaganda against homosexuals who object to being lumped under the LGBT banner. They give zero shits about women's rights to female-only spaces, including intimate spaces. They've basically become the enemy of gay people and homosexuals. But this article turns to their new, as of last year, their new CEO, Nancy Kelly, who says, all parents, including LGBT parents, deserve to be recognized for who they are, and it's incredibly frustrating that the Supreme Court has missed an opportunity to progress equality. You know what irritates me about that? I know, it's not even the main issue. They missed an opportunity to progress equality. That's probably a dictionary allowable verbing of a noun. There probably is a secondary entry in the dictionary, which means that, yes, it is an accepted, if not preferred, way of using it. But you almost never hear that. These people are always introducing new terminology and changing the parts of speech of words. They verb nouns. They do strange things with adjectives. It's like a tick with them. It's a vocal tick, a speech tick. Nancy Kelly goes on. The current legislation contradicts the fragile equality trans people currently have, where they can have full recognition on some legal documents but not on others. Just like any other parents, trans parents should be able to have their relationship to their child recognized on their birth certificates. No. No. There's, I think, the most important aspect of this push to falsify birth certificates, and we're going to get to death certificates too. And this is what this is. It is a push to falsify factual records, not to affirm. It's to falsify. A birth certificate is not a gender identity validation document. That is not its purpose. Its purpose is not to recognize the relationship between the parent and the child for the sake of being warm and caring, or to make somebody have good feels about themselves. It's a factual document. It's a public record. It's a statistical record. It is the public record. And I hung around the UK parenting forum Mumsnet very heavily last year, watching this case and watching the commentary on it. And I'd like you to think about this. And if somebody brings up an issue like this or talks about a case like this around you, I'd like you to introduce this into the conversation, because I think it is the most important and entirely neglected aspect of this. Even people on what they call the gender critical side, the people who recognize the reality of sex, who don't believe that all of us should have to pretend that men are women and vice versa, they're falling for the trap too. They say, this certificate is not for Freddie, it's not for the parent, it's for the child. The child deserves to have an accurate birth certificate. That's fine as far as it goes. The child should be entitled to have access to records that prove that child's identity and state factual data about their family relationships. But it's the same trap as thinking of this as a gender identity validation certificate. No, the birth certificate is not for the child. That is a foundational mistake. And frankly, it's a mistake that happens because of our normalized cultural narcissism. It is not for the child. It does not belong to the child. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the child too, and all of these people are sympathetic in ways that I think are, frankly, morally correct. I do believe that the child's interests here are more important than her deranged parents' interests. So we agree on this ethically and morally. but that doesn't matter. Good feelings don't change mistakes, and this is a bad mistake. This is not for the child. It's not for the parent. It is for society. It is not an individual possession. It is not a private brand name. Wrong. And why do I say that this is part of our narcissistic culture? Because it tracks with the idea that we have all of us, I have imbibed this to some degree too. We have to be conscious of this. We have all imbibed the idea that the whole world revolves around us. You see it subtly. How many websites, how many food delivery services, how many things like this have you seen in the past 10 years that are called my XYZ? So my bank card, my Visa card, my JCPenney account, my this, my home chef. I mean, some of these things are actually named those things. We tend to reach first for, we tend to conceive, we are losing the idea of a shared library or universe of objective facts that we all participate in, like the village green, right? In old New England villages, and certainly not only in New England, but we have something called the village green, sometimes called the town square. That is common land that is owned by the town collectively for the use of the people. You could graze your sheep. You might be able to plant something there. You can have a picnic there. It's the town green. It's not my space. It's not my lawn. It is a shared resource. Birth certificates and public records like this are not personal possessions, not even for that child. They are our shared statistical and factual heritage. Our side needs to remember this too. And I think we forget it. And here's where death certificates come into this conversation. I used to be a newspaper journalist a long time ago. But I learned about some of this stuff. I was a cops and crime reporter. And it was only 3 years I spent in journalism, but when I do things, I do them hard. I write them hard and put them up wet. So I journalismed hard for 3 years. I did a lot of work. I had a really good time. Glad I got out when I did. Could already see the storm clouds coming. I couldn't have predicted what it would turn into today. But most people don't know this. Birth certificates and death certificates are, in fact, public record in the United States under state law. Does that surprise you? I know it does, actually. I know that some of you listening to this are surprised by that. You thought of them as private, didn't you? Right? And I know that you thought that because I see the comments that people leave on stories when somebody says, there might be a story about a child who did not know that he was adopted and then went into the death certificate files for something else and then discovered the name of somebody who turned out to be his actual biological parent. I see people comment in places like this, oh, people aren't supposed to be able to see that stuff. That's a death certificate. No, sweetie. No. You can go down to the town clerk's office and go through the death certificates. Well, you probably can't now because COVID. These are, in fact, public record. Death certificates are a tool that journalists use for investigative stories. They were certainly relevant when I was writing crime stories and covering murder trials. It bothers me that so few people understand this because if we don't understand this, if we don't know what we've lost, we can't get it back. We are changing our relationship to the very idea of the truth, and we are rendering things inaccessible. We are rendering truthful documents actually to be false. But we're also starting to privatize these things. I've seen moves in some states to make certain portions of death certificates now viewable only by people who can prove next of kin status. And I'm sorry, I'm not convinced by the privacy arguments. I'm not convinced that that the private interests of the people there necessarily or usually outweigh the public interest in having this available to researchers and anyone who wants to go check the public record. So, death certificates are grossly inaccurate. Surprise you? Well, it's been going on for a long time. Sometime around the mid-20th century, let me put it this way. Autopsies used to be much more routine than they are today. What do I mean by that? I mean that many more dead people used to be autopsied than are autopsied today. Whether you agree with this or not, part of the reason for that, was doctors want to autopsy patients. They want to know exactly what they died from. They want to know if their diagnoses are accurate. Pathologists, this is what they do for a living. They want to do autopsies. And in the mid-20th century, the patient relationship to the doctor was a much more parent-child type relationship, and almost something sort of in the neighborhood of an in loco parentis relationship. And people pushed back on that, and they said, just because you wear a white coat doesn't mean you're God. I'm the patient. I decide what I do with my body. You hear it in the phrase doctor's orders, right? We still use the phrase, but it's an empty phrase now. It's referent, doesn't really exist anymore, because we no longer conceive of ourselves as, we don't conceive of doctors as legitimately being able to give us orders, right? If you want to check out of the hospital, you can do so against medical advice, but it's not defying doctors' orders. They don't have legal rights to command us. There's something to be said for correcting a power imbalance, but there's also something that's lost there. And it may have been the case, and I think it probably was the case, that doctors got above their station, that we treated them as demigods. That they were not questioned enough, and that a lot of people felt pressure to do things they wouldn't have done otherwise. I think that's probably true. On the other hand, it's possible to go too far in the other direction, and we're seeing that now. People acting as though doctors don't really know any more than they do about these things, right? So we tend to have pendulums that swing very widely, and they don't stay in the middle of the swing cycle as much as they should. Well, around the mid-20th century, people began to object to autopsies, and it became a cultural norm. When you talk to people now, I know it doesn't come up in conversation for you every day, but for professional reasons, I've had these conversations with people. It's a topic of frequent conversation. The idea is that they want to autopsy my mother. Well, she's not going to be cut up anymore. I mean, these people, they just want to cut up. I understand the emotions, right? It's understandable for people to have these emotions, especially when grief is fresh. But we've been way too understanding about it. I think, at least in the circles that I travel in, the public mood seems to be that to suggest an autopsy is almost offensive. That this should only be done in the most dire circumstances, and how insensitive, how horrible it is for a doctor to ask a family to give permission to cut up their dead grandmother. I mean, it's kind of hysterical, right? No, I understand. I do. I get it. I might have those feelings myself, contemplating the dead body of somebody I love being sliced into. I can understand that. But I think that those feelings have been stoked and validated so much that they have become hysterical. And the consequence of that is that death certificates are far less accurate than they used to be. Because we're not checking the diagnoses that are put on death certificates the way we used to. So I pulled a quote from an article. This was, there's a lot of these, but the one I pulled is from July of 2006 from the Southern Medical Journal. And the title is, Death Certificates are not reliable revivification of the autopsy. The strapline is, death certificates were frequently, this was a study, I believe, of about 1,600 records. And here's what they found. Death certificates were frequently inaccurate, and in 21.5% of cases were of no value because of an inadequate diagnosis. And as the examples, here are some of the causes of death they found in this group, this almost 22% of death certificates. Cardiopulmonary arrest, arrhythmia, or respiratory failure. I'm going to give you about 2 seconds to think about that. Did you figure out what's wrong with it? Cardiopulmonary arrest is a fancy way of saying your heart stopped beating. Respiratory failure is a fancy way of saying stopped breathing. That is not a cause of death. Every dead person on the face of the earth for all of time has experienced their heart stopping and their breath ceasing. That is not a cause of death. It is a description of the things that happen at death. Every dead person's heart stops. Every dead person's brain dies. Every dead person's lungs stop inflating. So this is the consequence of privatizing public goods. It's one of the consequences. And yeah, I think it's a consequence also of, and I don't mean this in a personality disorder way, it's worth repeating, narcissism exists on a spectrum. The word narcissism is not a synonym necessarily for bad person. We tend to use it most frequently when we're talking about excessive and pathological levels of narcissism. But it is worth remembering that there is a certain level of narcissism, or if you prefer, self-interest, that is necessary for an organism to survive. It's part of the survival urge, right? If you have no narcissism, no self-esteem, no self-regard, you're an absolute doormat and you'll walk out in front of traffic. So I'm not saying that we're all personality disordered now, but all of us, including me and including you, who live in the era that we do, over time, we have become collectively more narcissistic. We have started to conceive of things that used to be considered public goods and shareable resources as private things that should have our brand name on it, that should be prefixed with my, so that makes me feel good because it knows somebody's paying attention to me. It's all connected. It's all connected. And staying on the medical topic, I think I mentioned this on a recent episode, but honestly, I can't remember. So if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. You'll just have to live with it. It won't last forever, I promise. Headline: medical schools are now denying biological sex. This is an article by Katie Herzog. It was hosted on Barry Weiss's Substack. Substack is the paid newsletter platform. Barry Weiss used to work for the New York Times and then the Wall Street Journal. Katie Herzog used to report for the alternative weekly paper, The Stranger, out of Seattle, until she did a story on transition where she actually allowed people to ask questions and disagree. And she was she was driven out of professional and social life in Seattle. She was made an unperson. She's a lesbian also. So like many people, many actual homosexuals, we are not actually part of the LGBT community. We have been unpersoned. So Herzog's article talked about some correspondence that she had with some medical students. And the things that are going on in medical schools are alarming. Quote, during a recent endocrinology course at a top medical school in the University of California system, a professor stopped mid-lecture to apologize for something he'd said at the beginning of class. Let me correct myself. What I'm about to read to you is a quote from this professor. I believe that this student recorded this. Here's what the instructing doctor said. I don't want you to think that I am in any way trying to imply anything, and if you can summon some generosity to forgive me, I would really appreciate it, the physician says in a recording provided by a student in the class. Again, I'm very sorry for that. It was certainly not my intention to offend anyone. The worst thing that I can do as a human being is be offensive. The worst thing I can be as a human being is to be offensive. His offense was using the term pregnant women. This is... It's like hostage letters. Several months ago, I did a segment on the New York Times journalist Don McNeil, who was fired from the New York Times after going on a trip overseas with some journalism students as part of a mentoring and training program. And during a conversation one evening where somebody was claiming that another person had uttered a racial slur, Don McNeil repeated the slur in trying to clarify and ask exactly what was said. And for using the word, which we call the N-word, he was fired and wrote a hostage letter that sounds like this. I'm very, very sorry. The worst thing I can do is be offensive. This is somebody, this doctor, this instructor, is in that Twilight Zone episode. All those kids, well, they're not kids, are they? They're adults. But of course, we know that adolescence is so extended now that we expect people, at least to the age of 35, to act like teenagers and advertise their membership in a Harry Potter house. That's what we expect grown-ups to do now. Delayed maturation. He's in that Twilight Zone episode. He's apologizing because he was thinking bad things. Bad things. And he didn't mean to think bad things. And it's real good. It's a real good thing that you called me out on that. A real fine thing. This is lunacy. This is lunacy. And it is older people stark, staring, terrified of children and young adults. Something is wrong with a society that puts children and young people as the voices of authority over their elders. That's not normal. And no, it's not just not normal because I don't like it and I'm older now. The fact of the matter is, you know what? It really is true that the older you get, the more you know. I know, shocker. Who would have thought? When you have 40 years of experience, you know more things than when you have 20 years of experience. When you have 70 years of experience, you know more than you did when you had only 46 years of experience. The young are not going to lead us. I mean, you wouldn't know it. I mean, look at what we do with children. We got people bowing and scraping to an autistic 16-year-old with emotional stability problems called Greta Thunberg. Yes, I know today she's an adult, but she first came onto the world stage at 15 or 16 years old. Don't think bad thoughts about me. You'll end up in the cornfield. That's enough of that. We got a break, and then we've got more and a little bit of fun when we come back. We're going to have actually a little bit of fun. See you on the other side. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. You want to take a trip down a distorted memory lane with me? Some of you are old enough to remember the 80s cartoon Muppet Babies. Muppet, Muppet, Muppet Babies. Remember that one? Well, they're still around, but they're a little different. Let's take a look at this video. Take a listen.
Our royal ball. We met the most amazing princess. But they ran away, and all they left behind was this.
Everyone, there's something I need to tell you. The princess who came to your ball tonight was me. I'm Gonzarella.
But Gonzo, why didn't Vu tell us?
Because you all expected me to look a certain way. I don't want you to be upset with me.
If you couldn't see it, they were doing a riff on the Cinderella story, and the princess had run away and left one glass slipper, of course. Did you hear that? Did you catch it? The use of the they pronoun. The princess ran away, but they left this. Ugh. Ugh. It's repugnant. It's repellent. This is indoctrination. This is indoctrination. They're softening these children up. They're normalizing. Well, we don't know because a princess can be any gender. So when we don't know the gender pronouns that they want, we say they. Ugh. And Gonzarella, I mean, I was going to say that's his drag name, but that's his pizza drag name. Gonzarella. Jesus Christ. And, you know, this doesn't have to go so wrong. It does not have to go so wrong. When I was a young child in the late 70s and the early 80s, public television, was a babysitter. Sesame Street, The Electric Company, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And in the 70s, there was a campaign called Free to Be You and Me. I think that's what it was, either Free to Be You and Me or Free to Be You, Free to Be Me. And a number of famous people contributed to this children's educational campaign. I think it was started by Marlo Thomas, the actress. And the entire point of this was telling children that it was okay if you were a boy to like things that are associated with girls. It was okay if you were a girl to be rough and tumble, to like sports and trucks more than you liked Barbie dolls. It was a good message. It was, well, you know why current people don't like that message. You know why they want to get rid of it, because you know what that message is? It's anti-gender. It's anti-gender. Anti the idea that because you are born with a penis or a vulva, that you must necessarily carry these psychological traits, these predilections in the toys that you play with, these ways of relating to other people. That you didn't have to live up to those things. If you were different, it was okay. Because you're just a person, you're just a kid, and we're all kids together. And clothes were much more unisex. Girls and boys wore bib overalls. Some of you will remember that famous print advertisement for Lego. Came out in 80 or 81, maybe the late 70s. Cute little girl, redhead, copper hair and pigtails, wearing bib overalls and a striped shirt, sitting in front of a multicolored Lego set. I don't remember what the text was in the ad, but this was common when you looked at toy catalogs. When I was a kid, we had what we called the wish book. I don't know what your family called it, but if you're Gen X like me, you will remember as the lead into Christmas came up, you would get a catalog, sometimes from Sears or from JCPenney, a really thick one, like thick as a Bible, right? Because this was before the internet, so they had to list everything. And it was magical. Everything under the sun lived in the catalog for these department stores. Everything from dishes, car parts, home repair stuff, children's toys, clothing. And we would go through it and we'd say, Mom, is it time to get the wish book? And when you looked at the ads for children in there, if you are a younger listener, and especially if you're a parent, you may know this, but I want to reinforce it for you. The toy store that you see today, the toy advertisements that you see today, these didn't exist a generation or two ago. The pink aisle and the blue aisle did not exist. Yes, it is true that toys have always been, well, they call them gendered. I prefer to call them sexed. Yes, it's always been true that there have been the section with doll houses and dolls and then trucks and action figures, which are just dolls for boys, but we can't call them dolls because that would be terrible. But it was not regimented the way it is today. You literally walk into a toy store, and this is not just a figure of speech. It is the blue aisle. It's nothing but the color blue. You go to the girls' aisle, it's pink and purple. This bifurcation was never this extreme. This is not normal. What we're living through today is not a fact of nature. This is not how we've always done it. There was a different world. In that way, a better world. In a lot of ways, a better world. No, not everything is better in the past. We have made progress. There are things that are much better about living in 2021 than there were living in 1980, but not everything. We can have that world back. We can have the good parts of that world back. We're humans. We make the world around us. The first step to getting that world back is knowing that there's another possibility. And it's harder to do these days because we're historically ignorant. I think humans are always historically ignorant as a species, but it's pretty extreme now. So anyway, let's have a little more fun. I remember the first time I saw, this is just one version of a meme. I've seen many different paintings, many different photographs used in this meme, but it cracked me up the first time I saw it. This is a picture of Dolly Parton in concert. And it's a really funny picture, actually, because it looks like it's a screen grab from video or from motion picture. And it caught her with a really awkward facial expression that sometimes happens when you pull a frame out of somebody in live action. She's got one eye closed, the other one open. She looks like a drunk doll. You know those baby dolls who you lay them down on their back and their eyes closed, but only one of them works. We used to have one in my family. My Aunt Connie had a doll. I told you that story, actually. It was a sad story, but this is not that sad. I told this story, I think, in the episode called Over the Borderline. Talking about my mother's childhood and the year that she got a doll for Christmas. And her younger sister, Connie was profoundly mentally retarded. Her parents, my mother's parents, gave Connie the doll because Connie wanted the doll. It was my mother's Christmas present. But that doll, Connie must have had that doll for at least 25 years. And her name was Dolly Slocum. And Dolly Slocum got up to all sorts of hijinks. She was often very naughty. And I know this because I used to play house with my Aunt Connie. And it was usually my job to put Dolly Slocum in the naughty corner. I had to be daddy and Connie was mommy. Except she didn't call me daddy. My name was Mr. Josh. I miss her. So this meme, anyway... There we go. Half the show is 40% digressions. That's our brand, and you come for it. So this meme has a little phrase at the top. Hey, I like your personality. The person responds, thanks. It's a disorder. And underneath this picture of Dolly Parton making sort of air gun gestures with her hands, it says, you down with BPD? Yeah, you know me. I suspect that the people who made this meme are actually women with borderline personality disorder because it does tend to be their humor style, and I do think it's funny. But be careful of these people because if you get into any of their spaces online and you watch them, they glory in their borderline personality disorder. They wear it as a badge of pride. They call themselves borderliners. Borderliners. And they tell stories about their hijinks and their antics. You know, Well, last night I completely decompensated and was a complete mega bitch to my husband and blah, 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 blah. And everybody laughs and titters like it's the cutest thing ever. I mean, it's kind of funny to look at from a distance, but it's not funny to live with. Oh, honey. So then I was thinking about, well, I was sort of half-heartedly thinking about merchandise for the show. Oh, by the way, I'll save that for later. I'll save that for the next time. Make you tune into another episode. Was thinking about eventually having merchandise for the show. And I thought, well, what can we have? And everybody's got T-shirts and everybody's got mugs and some people have sunglasses. And I thought, well, why not a collection of children's stories? When I was a kid, we had, one of my favorite things was record albums, 45s, 33 long-playing albums. And in those days, remember, pre-internet, Storybook Records were really popular. So Disney, and actually not just Disney, many companies had a wide range of Storybook Records. They would come, it would be a picture book about, yay big, the size of a little golden book, if you know those children's books. But in the back, there would be a 45 record. And it was usually, I don't know, you can probably get about 4 minutes of audio on each side of a 45. So these were 8 to 10 minute stories. And what you did was you put the 45 record on and you'd get a narrator who'd tell you that they were about to read the story to you. And when you hear the chime, bring, turn the page. And I had the little engine that could, which is my favorite. Oh God, I love that. So many of them. But there were also record albums, full-length, long-playing albums, 33 1/3 RPMs. And they came with wonderfully illustrated books to go along with them. And my favorite one was a Hans Christian Andersen book of fairy tales. And this one included four stories. And they were really well produced. There was music and sound effects. And they got actors and actresses to be narrators. They were just really well done. They were entrancing for a child. And this one included, what were the stories on this one? The Steadfast Tin Soldier, The Little Match Girl. The Little Match Girl always made me cry. In fact, I'm not even going to think about it right now because I will start blubbering on the camera. It is such a sad story. I can't remember the other ones. Maybe I'll find it later. So anyway, I thought, why not have a version like that? But these will be woke children's stories. So it'll be a collection of trans Christian Andersen stories. And I've come up with a few. And if you can think of any ideas, like drag names, I always take suggestions, but I only use quality ones. Don't bring crap to me. I might love you, but if it's crap, I'm not going to use it. If you have a funny and clever title, send it to us at us@disaffected.fm. Here's what I came up with. The Complete Trans Christian Andersen Reader, The Little Trans Girl, The Steadfast Tin Peacekeeper, The Snow Drag Queen, Border Lena, The Red Strappy Shoes, and The Brave and Stunning Duckling. I should actually write these out. If I do, I promise I'll bring you story time to the show later. Okay, so we've had our fun. Now let's get into something gruesome again. I want to talk about analogies. I go to some trouble to think up good analogies to illustrate concepts to people. I do it on this show. I think about them and I write them out and I try to work through them. What will make this as accessible and understandable to people as possible? But I do this in other areas of my life. I'm not a formal teacher, but in my career working in nonprofit human services, a large part of my work has been consumer education and also education for policymakers and lawmakers about issues that consumers face. So I have been teaching for almost 20 years. Before COVID came along and Zoom with everything, I used to travel a lot and give a lot of public talks. So analogies are important. And I think there is a strange antipathy among people today to the use of analogies. And I'm not sure that I figured out where it comes from. Analogies, I don't think we can think without analogies, comparisons. You know, X is to Y as A is to B, right? So a simple analogy might be dishcloth is to sink as body brush is to bath. Anything like that. Very simple one. But they're how we think. Analogies, well, this gets a little bit recursive because I'm going to use an analogy to illustrate an analogy. But analogies are like physical ramps, right? They are a gradual incline that starts you out slowly and then brings you up stepwise until you get to your goal, right? So they're intellectual ramps. You say, okay, so you understand how this works. Think about that, and then look at these two things, and you will see the relationship between them, and you will see how they relate to each other and how they interact with each other. That's what analogies are. I was talking about this on Twitter this week and was horrified to discover when people responded that back in 2005, whichever the goal-setting body is that comes up with the SAT exams, they got rid of analogies on the SAT after 2005. How do you not test people? Well, I think I know. Because one's grasp of analogies or one's inability to grasp analogies that is in fact an indication of your IQ. I'm not saying you have to be brilliant to understand analogies, but the greater degree of difficulty you have, this does tell people something about your reasoning skills. Why not get rid of it? We don't want to compare children, do we? We don't want anyone to think they're not as smart as someone else. And we certainly wouldn't want to hold them to a high standard that they had to work through blood, sweat, and tears to get through, because that hurts. We don't want to hurt children, do we? If we don't like differences, if we don't like outcomes, whether it's finding that some children are more intellectually gifted than others, more artistically gifted than others, more gifted in sports and athletics than others, if we don't like that, we just pretend it isn't true. So we stop measuring it. But there is a hostility to the use of analogies in a lot of topics that I have noticed for years now. And it usually comes, let me think. I took some notes here. What was I going to share with you? So here, take some non-controversial analogies. Here's a couple I came up with. You might say, if you were trying to get people to understand the relationship between the concept of sprinting and jogging. No, let me correct myself. If you were trying to explain to somebody what a lightning round quiz was, right? You ever listen to quiz shows, or if you go to trivia nights sometimes at a bar or a club, they might have a lightning round quiz where the goal is to answer as many questions accurately within 15 or 30 seconds as possible. So if you were trying to explain to somebody what a lightning round quiz was, you might compare it to a test that didn't have time, and you might use this analogy. It's like sprinting. It's like sprinting is to jogging. Regular jogging is like answering a test that has no time limits. You go as slow and as steady as you need to. What matters is that eventually you complete the entire distance, or you complete all the answers on the test. A lightning round quiz is like sprinting. You have to complete the distance in as short a time as possible when you sprint, and it works the same with a lightning round quiz. So that's a very simple analogy. If people reacted to an analogy like that the way they react to analogies that are used for more unpleasant topics, it would sound like this. How dare you? Or let me do it Greta Thunberg style. How dare you? Are you stupid? Sprinting is not taking a test. You're running, you moron. You're not filling things out with a pencil and paper. What are you, stupid? No, I'm not stupid. You might be, but I'm not. There are some people who actually don't understand analogies. Ooh, don't turn your back on those ones. But people get angry like this when you use analogies in more controversial places. And I see it a lot when I talk about psychological issues and psychological abuse. On this show, as you know, the working thesis of this show is that the psychological distortions of character that are characteristic of cluster B personality disorders, that these traits are the psychological traits that you find behind things like domestic abuse and child abuse. Even people who have never heard the term cluster B, who don't know what borderline personality disorder is, who don't know what narcissistic personality disorder is, these people might actually know what it is, they just don't understand the taxonomy and the vocabulary, because they might understand from a personal perspective what the abuse dynamic looks like in a household, what typical domestic abuse looks like, what child abuse looks like. They just don't understand that the people who perpetrate these things all have a common psychological profile. And that profile is almost always cluster B. So I make analogies. I say what we are going through in society is analogous to what happens in domestic abuse. The same relationship between truth and lies, between care and concern and exploitation, these things abide in the same way in how we deal with each other publicly that we are used to seeing or thinking that we only see in the domestic sphere. People get very angry about this. This isn't like battered spouses. This isn't like being a wife batterer. That's crazy. That's abuse. That's hitting. It's not like that at all. And I suspect that the greater part of that resistance is because the person thinks that this might be a truthful description that they don't want to be true. So I think that they might well see that relationship does obtain, that it isn't crazy to say it, but they might be so emotionally resistant to accepting that as the truth that they have this reaction. But honestly, I'm not always sure. I think I see a pretty good number of people. I wouldn't put a percentage on it because I don't know. But I think there are a lot of people out there who literally do not know how to think this way. They don't understand. When they say, that's not this, how can you compare them? They're telling you the truth. They cannot make their mind work that way. And that scares me. That really scares me. Because this is fundamental. This is fundamental to the way we think and the way we learn and how we process information. It's part of our brain structure. And people are going to have various levels of capacity and talent at tasks, from intellectual tasks to artistic or physical or spiritual tasks. That variation is normal, and not everybody is going to be great at everything. That's fine. But either the intellectual inability or the emotional inability to tolerate and understand an analogy like that really does not bode well for our public discourse and for our relationships with each other. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's mostly emotional resistance, or is it lack of intellectual capacity, or is it lack of ever having been trained in how to think? Is it how bad our public school system is? That children are not being taught to think this way. And what I'm describing to you here is not high-level stuff. It doesn't require a genius IQ to do this. This is basic stuff. This is the kind of stuff that made up part of the core curriculum. I shouldn't have used that term. The basic foundations of public education used to include these things. I remember being taught to think this way in primary school. I didn't go to a magnet school. I just went to a regular public school. People can't do this anymore. So we're coming up to the end of the show here, and I don't have time to talk in great depth about this, but we'll be picking it up again because this stuff isn't going to go away. There's an alarming increase in discussion about vaccine passports and vaccine mandates in this country. And I look at the news, read the news online. I am subjected to National Public Radio in other people's cars. So I hear it. And the number of people who have an appetite for the government to mandate vaccines is really scaring the shit out of me in this country. People love it. And they love it. I'm sorry, I know they say that they want vaccine mandates and vaccine passports because they care about people and they don't want to see people die. They're lying. That is not their primary concern. It is way past that. I will not accept that. This is not coming from a good faith place, even when we're talking about good people, ordinarily good people. No. No. This is not care. It's not compassion. It's bloodthirsty. Because what excites them is the prospect of seeing other people punished and thwarted. No, I don't think you should be able to go to the bank. No. You shouldn't be allowed to go to the grocery store. No, you have no right to bring your unclean, unvaccinated self into a bar, a club, a museum, a music hall. I want to see these vaccine mandates and passports because I want to see these people suffer. People say it right out loud. You are killing people. I want to see you try to live your life. Ah. They don't have any shame about it. They don't have any shame. They're not embarrassed to say this. They're not embarrassed to be open sadists. Bloodthirsty, sadistic. And I thought, what does this remind me of? It reminds me of Salem. You know, Ronald Reagan said in one of his famous speeches, it's morning in America. Well, it's not morning in America now. It's 1692, and we're in Salem. We are all in the crucible now. We are whispering to the town officials about Tituba. Teenagers are throwing themselves about bodily on the floor, having hysterical fits, and claiming that witches right there in the room, their friends and neighbors, they're doing it. You can't see them do it, but they're doing it. We not only accept spectral evidence, it's the only kind of evidence we accept. And the whole town wants its turn putting another rock on Giles Corey's chest. Well, remember what he said, Giles Corey, as he lay dying. More weight. I'll see you next time. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.